Hi, I'm Jim Stroud, and this is my podcast. Today, I had the distinct pleasure of speaking with Bill Banham, founder and editor over at HR Gazette magazine, host of the popular HR Chat podcast, and organizer of various HR-related summits and meetups in Canada, the US, and the UK, including Disrupt HR. He's kind of a big deal. And he's my guest next on the Jim Stroud podcast. The Recruiting Life is a newsletter that gives a quirky view on the world of work and aspires to educate, entertain, and inspire with articles, comics, podcasts, videos, and more. It is produced on a weekly basis by yours truly, Jim Stroud, and is supported by readers like you. Topics in this newsletter include the future of work, current labor trends, the impact of AI on the recruitment industry, and more. Subscribe now and receive it every Monday in your email by going to jimstroud.beehiiv.com. That URL is jimstroud.beehiiv.com. A link is in the podcast description. Don't wait. Subscribe now. Operators are standing by. Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Jim Stroud podcast. Today we have a very special guest. Special guest, tell us, who are you and what do you do?
Hello, Jim. I don't know about special. Hey, everybody. I'm Bill Banham. I am the founder and editor over at the HR Gazette, host of the HR Chat Pod, and I organize a whole bunch of events for HR pros, leaders, recruiters, anybody really interested in the world of work in Canada, in the US, and in the UK, including a whole bunch of the Disrupt HR chapters.
Very nice. Very nice. Now I got a good grasp of what HR Chat is all about, having been both a guest and a listener. If you would tell listeners more about HR Chat and while you're at it, HR Gazette as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for allowing me to plug a little bit. My background is in HR events and magazines, Jim. I've always kind of been in and around media, or tech, or media and tech. So many years ago, before I went very grey, I was the editor of HR Review in the UK, hrreview.co.uk. And that is, surprise, surprise, a magazine for HR people and leaders and similar folks with similar interests. And so from there, started the HR Gazette and the HR Chat podcast after I'd moved over to Toronto, Canada. Beautiful Canada. I am now a proud holder of a Canadian passport. Great country. If you haven't been, please do check it out. Mr. Trudeau, you can send my check in the post for promoting Canada. I'll send you the address. Anyway, sorry, this is a long way of telling you about the HR Gazette and the HR Chat podcast, Jim. So the HR Gazette has been going since 2014, and we talk about anything to do with the world of work. And the HR Chat Pod has been going since 2016. It's the most downloaded and most engaged with HR podcast in Canada, number 7 in the US, and number 10 globally, according to FeedSpot and a few others. Thank you. And part of my job is I get to chat with clever people like yourself, entertaining people like yourself. I recently interviewed you as we record this episode today. It hasn't gone out yet on the HR Chat feed, but it is coming to some ears close to you soon.
Dun, dun, dun.
And on that show, Jim, I've recorded, probably over 600 interviews with folks, and we have guest hosts as well, and they do interviews too. We've had some awesome people on, people like Dave Ulrich, William Tincup, Josh Person, Whitney Johnson. There's a long line of awesome people, and of course, my favorite is this chap called Jim Stroud.
That's a quid I owe you right there. What would you say is your personal podcast hosting style?
So there was, God rest his soul, a wonderful UK journalist called Michael Parkinson. And Michael Parkinson, what his style was, he'd ask a question and then he'd shut up and he'd let his guests tell their story. He'd let them speak.
Hmm.
If they're going on too long, maybe he'd jump in and say something. But otherwise, he let them do what they came to do, and that's share their story. And I try to do something similar on the
Okay.
HR chat pod.
Cool. So would that be your advice for any would-be podcasters out there?
Gosh, advice for would-be podcasters. I think number one, stick at it. Um, there's a whole bunch of things that you've got to do before you get to stick at it, of course. But often people say, how do you grow an audience? How do you get lots of downloads, etc. In my experience with the HR chatbot, for example, and I'm
Mm.
involved with a few different podcasts, the People and Performance podcast, the HR review show, and whatnot as well. But in the case of the HR chat show, stick at it. But for the first couple of years, the download numbers were pretty flat, and then you get some more interesting guests on the show, and it starts to spike up and spike up, and then of course you've got more of your reputation to go back to people and say, hey, we've had these wonderful guests on, our numbers are now X. That attracts higher caliber of, in our case, senior HR influencers and decision makers in large
Sure.
organizations and whatnot. We want those sorts of practitioners on the show often. So stick at it. But before that, it's about promotion. It's about building up relationships. It's about asking your guests to share the episodes too, right? That's a
Mm.
big thing. People often forget to do that.
Hmm. Hmm. Now you're a pundit and a community builder and an influencer. The list goes on. Talent and leadership space. What inspires you to focus on building both online and in-person business communities? How do you see these two types of communities complementing each other?
Well, I suspect you're a bit like me, Jim. You're a people person. You're a bit of
Yeah.
an extrovert. Is the sense that I get from you. You're very good. I think I used the word gregarious before we hit record today.
The
Yeah,
word of the day.
and I love mingling with people. I love networking. I love getting to know new people and learning from them. Right, and so in person events are probably always going to be my favorite avenue for building relationships for sure.
Hmm.
Um, but I think there's an opportunity to use social media and online avenues to support that, and for the in person to support those. So in my case, with what we do, we'll host meetups or summits, and ahead of that, around that, we'll record interviews for different podcasts with speakers and with attendees. We'll create show reels. We'll push it out all through the socials, lots of different landing pages for different things too. And it all feeds back in. We'll write reviews afterwards about the events, keep the buzz going. Um, I'm a big believer in having grassroots events in addition to bigger ones. So in the case of Disrupt, you've got 14 speakers, 5 minutes each, Jim, 20 slides, 15 seconds per slide. It's rapid fire stuff. But to feed those communities, I'm a big believer in having meetups in pubs, that kind of thing too, and talking about that and sharing that on social. I think I think if you do those things and you keep at it again, then you will grow a community.
Interesting. Interesting. Present company excluded. Who are your favorite people in your network and why?
Well, okay, so I can't mention Jim Stroud. Got it. Well then,
Your hands are tied now, mate.
uh, well, I don't know if I want to mention anybody else really. Uh, I'm lucky to have some really cool people in my network. Okay,
Mm.
very, very fortunate for that. I feel very grateful for that. A few shout outs, people like Pauline James, based up in Toronto. She and I have produced some events together. She's awesome. She co-hosts and guest hosts a bunch of the HR chat pods. In fact,
Mm.
as we record this today, we're doing a mini series on AI and HR over the next few weeks, and she's hosting those. She's a wonderful person, just a really good human being. So she's somebody I'd shout out to. Another cool person up in Toronto is Rob Catalano. He and I built an event series called Innovate Work, and we had a lot of fun doing that. And he's a great guy, and he built a big HR tech company and sold it, and now he's leading a new component, and it's great to see that.
Mm.
The guy who got me into this world many years ago, a chap called Paul Gray, who was the publisher over at HR Review. He and I, to this day, we've known each other for a very long time now. We still have a great relationship, and I see him as a bit of a mentor and someone I can lean on. And it's important to have mentors in your network. I'd say that. And then, in terms of folks who've been on the show who I'd love to shout out to, but I'm a huge fanboy of William Tincup. I've got to say, Jim.
Yeah, he's a
I
good
saw
guy.
that. I saw that guy one time. He did a 20-minute talk with one slide with just a bunch of words on it. Okay, and he is a very clever guy, very charismatic, and he's so chill all the
Oh
time,
yeah,
isn't
oh
he? So.
yeah, yeah. He is. He is. He's Mr. Chill. He is that. He is that. Um, in building a community that caters to professionals in HR, tech, business, how does your team ensure that the content shared through live events and social media is not only diverse, which is another key word of the day, but also relevant to the current challenges and trends in each sector?
Yep. So it's really important to represent all ideas and to introduce new opportunities for folks to get out there and share their ideas and learn from them. So, for example, with Disrupt HR, the format having 14 speakers,
Hmm.
the way that me and my teams try to run with those is that gives you an opportunity to, yeah, of course you can have big influencers, people like Perry Timms who are going to be speaking there, that they're the crowd pullers, they've got super cool things to say. By the way, in the case of Perry Timms, I think that's the best disrupt talk I've ever seen. Perry, you are amazing. um, but I would also always try and allocate spots to newbies, people who've never spoken before perhaps, but maybe they've just finished a master's in HR, something like that. We had an instance of just that. Someone who now works for the NHS, the main healthcare, the government-backed healthcare provider in the UK, and she'd never spoken before, and she knocked the socks off the audience. And
Hmm.
I think that's really cool to do that. We also partner up with a charity that supports young folks between the ages of 16 and 24, and we try and offer opportunities at all of our events to those young folks to share their experiences too. Some of those are trying to get into the job market for the first time, so it's interesting to get their philosophy. Um, Asking the speakers is a big one, Jim. They know what they want to talk about. They're the experts,
Mm-hmm.
So as much as possible, what do you guys want to talk about, and then ask some intelligent questions around that. Make sure that it doesn't overlap too much with other content that you've got offered at a particular event or an online property, because you need to have variation there. But those would be some approaches that we take.
Interesting. Interesting. I know there are probably people listening who could use some advice or would appreciate some advice as far as looking to build and cultivate thriving online in-person communities and how they can overcome common challenges and obstacles. Can you speak to any of that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'd say if you're getting going with a new event series, say, let's talk about that for a minute. In-person
Mm.
event series, that's a challenge. If you're building something from scratch, that's a challenge. And so you've got to be a bit inventive. Hopefully, you've got folks with you who can build relationships with others and find some common ground. But for example, if we're taking a disrupt to a new city, Jim,
Mm-hmm.
um, you got to get it going. You got to build it up. It's a little bit of a risk the first time you do it there. So if we can find venue partners who offer up cool office space, say, um, in exchange for that, we'll say you guys can co-host, you can have a speaker, maybe we'll do a podcast interview. So using those other channels available to you to sort of build up relationships. I think that's a big one in terms of tackling initial obstacles for folks starting events from scratch. If they're sort of more community events, find different cultures. Different ways that you guys can work together. Another key one, obviously, is dad jokes. Okay, you gotta. So I always start my events with the same terrible dad joke. I've used it all throughout 2023, which means I've got to find a new one for 2024. Um, and it goes something like this. We'll have a bunch of people, they've just finished their networking. I'll stand up to say a few words as part of the intro, and I'll start with, great to see you all here today. What an amazing venue we're at. Great vibes. And they were like, yeah, it's amazing. And I'll say, but there was some trouble outside. And then the audience will go, oh, what? And I'll say, yeah, there was a peanut. He got beaten up. And they say, hang on a minute, a peanut? And I'll say, yeah, it was assaulted. And half of the audience, And half of the audience, Jim, will groan, and the other half maybe you'll get a little bit of applause. I don't know. But dad jokes. That's always a
I
good one.
love dad jokes. That's funny. That's funny. I'll give you a few after after we conclude here. You've been very generous with your time. A lot of great information that you shared. How can listeners connect with you if they want to know more, or if they want to just maybe attend your events?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jim. And again, I appreciate the time today. Thank you very much for having me on as a guest. If folks want to connect with me, LinkedIn, that is a place where I hang out quite a lot. Check out our events. If you go to Eventbrite and then search for HR Gazette, you'll see a whole list of different events we're doing in Canada, the US, and the UK. So that's a good place. Or people can connect with me by emailing me, which is bbanham@hr-gazette.com.
Cool. And to make it easier, I will make a mention of that in the podcast description. So just if you're listening, just look at the podcast description. You'll see links to his various properties and how to connect with him on LinkedIn and other things. Bill, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate you being on the Jim Stroud podcast.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, my time is up. I thank you for yours. I'll see you again real soon right here with a brand new episode of the Jim Stroud podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to me. I can be reached by email at jimstroud@jimstroud.com. And one last favor, if I may ask, please rate this podcast. 5 stars is preferred, but please comment with your honest opinion. I really appreciate that. All right. Okay, until next time, bye-bye.